Hi, this is your tropics update for September 14th, 2020. Please note I'm not a meteorologist and all the thoughts I give here are mine alone. Always consult the National Hurricane Center for the latest updated information. So there is a lot to talk about in the tropics. Today we have many systems to watch, including of course Sally, Paulette still, and now newly formed Teddy this morning, which should be watched over the next week or so. So I will start off with Paulette because Paulette is now not really threatening land anymore. Bermuda actually suffered a direct hit last night from this storm, a pretty rare thing to happen, but it did. In such a large ocean to see a hurricane just impact Bermuda is impressive from a meteorological standpoint. Of course, not for Bermuda. I'm hoping people stayed safe there. But the storm now, you'll notice, has wrapping convection, a bit of a cloudy eye tonight. But as it continues northeastward, it is expected that Paulette will intensify further into a major hurricane over the next few days before eventually becoming extratropical and presumably meandering southward eventually, maybe bringing some rain showers to the Azores, but dissipating around there. So, of course, Paulette might become a major hurricane. At this point, of course, more of a statistical thing, but there are still some threats to land actually with Paulette. As it moves away, it will be generating swells, so you could have higher wave action than usual along the East Coast, Bermuda as well. So definitely want to keep an eye on that. Just because it's moving away from land doesn't mean that there won't be any impacts. But for the most part, Paulette is about done being tracked in terms of a land threat at this point. Just simply now keep an eye on it. We'll probably end up having a major hurricane. Will be, I guess, some nice eye candy to look at in the Atlantic, but not a threat to land, hopefully, anymore. So next I want to talk about Tropical Storm Teddy. Now, Teddy formed last night or early this morning. And Teddy's an impressive storm right now. The center is located about here, and you'll notice that there is some convection firing around it. Outflow is expanding to the west, so definitely a really healthy environment for the storm. And modeling indicates that it will take off. So NHC, of course, forecasts now for Teddy. Teddy's expected to become a major hurricane in just a few days. Not really shocking given the favorable environment, but that's a bit about where our certainties end with this storm. It's likely it will recurve before the Antilles, so they're looking safer now. But the issue that comes up then is, will Teddy make a recurve out to sea, or could Teddy possibly move westward and threaten the United States, or threaten Bermuda even with another hurricane, which wouldn't be a good thing to see. But simply put, it's a bit too early to suggest that Teddy won't impact land. Well, it seems right now that Teddy will end up recurving relatively early on, so it should avoid land. There have been some model indications today that it could end up tracking a little bit more westward or even get stuck under a ridge. And of course, any movement closer to land is not something we want to see. But unfortunately, when you do have a powerful hurricane located here, you need to watch out for it. So I'll show you the EPS ensembles, or the Euro ensembles EPS. So these are new today. Now, excuse me, you'll notice a lot of these end up recurving Teddy. Pretty good consensus that it's going to recurve. The issue is not all of them do. You do have a few that get a little bit too close for comfort, move a little bit too far west. You have them up here near Bermuda, even East Coast, but that's very far out at this point. So I like to focus more on the fact that there is a risk Teddy's track could shift further west, especially even though Teddy's an impressive storm today. Any delay in its development will move the track further west because it won't gain latitude as fast. That's something to note. Importantly, stronger storms move more poleward, especially when you have no ridging to try to block them down like Teddy does at this point. That's where you have to watch for a possible track shift westward towards the United States or Bermuda, especially Bermuda would probably be more at risk from Teddy right now than anywhere else still, unfortunately. So definitely going to want to keep a close eye on it. Our hope is, you don't really say this very often, but hopefully Teddy rapidly intensifies, becomes a very powerful hurricane, and curves out early enough so that it's just an ace maker and doesn't do anything else. Of course, that would probably bring more swells to the East Coast, but definitely better than having a landfalling hurricane, especially one that looks like it could be very potent. But as for Teddy, I want to then just turn over to the Atlantic in general before we start talking about Sally, which is our largest threat right now. The Atlantic is incredibly active right now. We have 5 named systems, except Renee has now become a remnant low, so it doesn't really count anymore. But earlier today, we had 5 named storms active at once, which tied a record historically not set since 1971. Pretty impressive to have 5 named storms at once. Of course, some of these aren't as impressive. Vicky will meander here, move westward, and dissipate, not expected to last long due to unfavorable conditions. Teddy, of course, we're going to be watching. Renee is now dissipated and won't do much of anything. Paulette will be moving this way. And, of course, then we have our next disturbance to really keep an eye on is this one off the coast of Africa, which could develop as it moves westward, relatively low latitude. So I'll keep an eye on it to see if it develops. And then there is actually a recon flight. This is new tonight. There's a recon flight out for this disturbance in the Gulf of Mexico. We had discussed a few days ago. It's still not very impressive looking, but there is more convective activity today over it. And of course, since we've seen just so much activity this year, NHC has decided that they're going to send a recon mission tomorrow. So we'll see if it's developing. If it does, hopefully it wouldn't be a threat to land. But at this point, keep an eye on this one. A system emerges out of here. Of course, when you have a system emerge out of the Gulf of Mexico, it's probably going to hit somebody. So we'll definitely want to keep a close eye on it. But as for that, I'd like to turn now all of our attention to Sally. So Sally today, of course, became very impressive compared to last night. 24 hours ago, the storm was improving pretty drastically as you had an expansive area of convection over its center. And this morning, it had the most important time of its life when the center reformed to the east. Now, this was important because it finally let the LLC and the lower level center and the mid-level center stack. And when that happened, it allowed Sally to undergo what was a period of rapid intensification. Now, thankfully, that rapid intensification stopped pretty much right after that, and we haven't seen that much intensification since earlier. Although, as of right now, NHC does state that the storm has winds of 100 miles per hour. That could have possibly decreased a little bit. Recon's in the storm now, and the main concern currently is that you're noticing they're not finding necessarily winds that support 100 miles per hour, but we'll see what NHC does with that information at the next update. What is important though to note is even if winds have become slightly weaker and the storm is just steady at this point, we're watching a lot of things. The first is you'll notice here the storm's wind field has broadened since earlier. This is interesting because I had a broad wind field initially. It contracted today during the rapid intensification phase. And now it's broadened again a little bit due to the just overall lack of convective activity and organization. So you'll notice here you have a wind max here, here, and here. The center actually does not have much of the strong winds except to the southeast, it appears. Recon's going in for another pass now, but they're probably going to find much of the same because you'll notice tonight Sally's not really organizing all that much. There is an impressive new burst of convection over the center, so I think we'll have to watch out to see what that does. But so far, Sally hasn't really undergone much organization since earlier this afternoon, likely due to some westerly shear that was still impeding on the storm. You'll notice here it got a little bit caught up here, and there was also likely some dry air involved, which you can kind of make out here. It's pretty certain that there was some dry air in here, not too much, but when a storm doesn't have a completely closed-off core, that is an issue. Any kind of shear or dry air can impede tropical development. So here you look at the radar imagery, and you'll notice that's the biggest thing right now. So first off, Sally doesn't have necessarily the most defined northern eye wall. It's pretty impressive, but the issue is that you'll almost notice there are like two bands here. So it's not entirely defined yet, and the other issue is that the southern eye wall is open. And of course, when you have an open eye wall, the storm can't really get insanely strong. That's probably one of the reasons why we've seen the storm not strengthen much since earlier today. The eye wall we've been discussing most of the day, will it close? So far it hasn't. If it remains open till landfall, then it might not get stronger than this. But of course, there is an important process coming up that is called diurnal maximum, and diurnal maximum is favorable for convection to develop over the storm. So, considering the fact that we're now starting to see some more hot towers form here, it's reasonable to think that the storm overnight will strengthen more and organize more, possibly close up its eye wall due to Dmax. But of course, if it doesn't, this thing that is still important to note is, let's say Sally doesn't get much stronger from here, and just stays about 90 or 100 miles per hour. The thing to note, though, is that the major impacts that are coming with it, no matter what, are heavy rainfall and storm surge, and having a larger system will make storm surge much worse. So I'd like to talk about storm surge first. So you'll notice here, National Hurricane Center forecast a peak of 7 to 11 feet for southeast Louisiana, and this could shift some more depending on exactly where the storm makes landfall, which I'm sure we will see some minor changes tonight because the storm does appear to be moving a little bit further east. It's kind of been indicated a little bit by modeling today, so you'll notice here NHC track right now is here, pretty good position, but of course we'll see a very slow-moving system, unfortunately, which is one of the reasons why we're expecting such bad storm surge and such extreme rainfall. You'll notice rainfall, of course, is pretty bad here. You have a large area, 15 to 20 inches, just along the Mississippi and Alabama coastline, and then you have inland, you have 6 to 10 inches of rain. Florida Panhandle also 6 to 10 inches of rain, and 15 here. So all these areas are going to undergo, potentially catastrophic rainfall. It's definitely concerning, but the fact is, Paulette is already slowing down a lot. You'll notice it's only moving west-northwest at 5 miles per hour, and it will continue to slow, possibly. So you're going to have a very slow storm coming onto landfall. In fact, landfall now could possibly be delayed up until early Wednesday morning, which is pretty insane, to be honest, considering the fact that we were expecting it possibly, I believe, as early as late tonight. But of course, since the storm shifted further east a little bit slower, you're delaying the landfall more, especially when you have a landfall up here as opposed to down here when storms are moving slow. That could really change the forecast. So, of course, the thing that's happened, of course, is we've seen hurricane warning shifted eastward. Possibly we'll see some discontinued over here. The National Hurricane Center will, of course, always be updating that and ensuring that it's accurate. You'll also notice Sally is going to rapidly weaken once it gets inland, but that's pretty much not an issue when it's already dumped a bunch of rain. So, of course, what also makes storm surge worse is the fact that when you have a storm that possibly could sit near the coastline for 24 to 36 hours, you have onshore flow consistently pushing onshore, and yet that makes storm surge worse. And also, if Sally's wind field stays larger, but winds remain around 100 miles per hour, that would still arguably be worse than even a major hurricane that's more compact, because having a larger wind field allows the storm to push more water onshore. So it is going to be important to watch how the storm evolves tonight, because if the core becomes more compact, you could possibly see less storm surge somewhere, but higher winds. If not, storm surge could possibly be made even worse. Definitely going to be concerning, but regardless of all of that, the storm surge and rainfall are going to be pretty life-threatening impacts, both of them. Winds also life-threatening, but very specifically, I want to mention rainfall and storm surge are probably going to be what Sally was really remembered for. And if you've been told to evacuate for those impacts or wind impacts or anything, you definitely want to heed all these warnings. Always note, please, storm surge is deadly. It is the deadliest part of a hurricane. Truly speaking, storm surge and flooding rains cannot be lightly taken at all. While you can survive winds, you really can't run away from storm surge. It's just going to come and become very dangerous for you. So, if you live along the coastline or inland somewhere and you've been told to evacuate, definitely heed those warnings. You don't want to risk your life. All preparations at this point should be getting rushed to completion. As Sally gets even closer to landfall around this region, tropical storm force conditions will begin to move inland, eventually hurricane force conditions, and they might last quite a long time, because once again, when you have slow moving system, you could have a large area and then you have it stay over the area. You have onshore flow continued, which is one of the reasons why, again, you're watching so much for this. So what we're going to be watching tonight on radar imagery, satellite, and recon is to, one, see if Sally can manage to close off its southern eye wall. If it does close off its southern eye wall, I would suspect that you could possibly have a hurricane nearing major hurricane status, maybe even a major hurricane, but that's, of course, a lot of ifs. The big thing to note is if Sally is a major hurricane or if Sally is a 100-mile-per-hour hurricane in Category 2, impacts are going to be similar, especially when it comes to rainfall and storm surge, which I'm emphasizing a lot because the National Hurricane Center also emphasizes a lot. These impacts are dangerous. They should be taken seriously. You already noticed here, look at these rain bands. I mean, they're pretty much just stalled now over the ocean. So when Sally moves closer to land and it starts just, dumping rain over these areas, you can easily see why almost 2 feet or more is forecast for some of these locations along the coastline. The rain is just going to keep falling, and it's not going to stop for a while. So it's going to be very dangerous. We've also mentioned storm surge inundation is already starting in some locations along the coastline. We've seen videos out today from different areas already showing floods, cars stuck in the beach because of some storm surge inundation and high tides. So that's always concerning. You have it come even before the storm arrives. Then you have the heavy rainfall on top of that. It's really going to mess with the drainage systems, and it's going to just make the issues even worse. So there's really no easy way to say it. If you've been told to evacuate, now is the time to follow those orders and evacuate. If you're preparing, prepare and finish preparing now. The preparation should be being rushed to completion at this point. Of course, it's going to be important to watch, see exactly how Sally tracks overnight and tomorrow to determine an exact landfall location somewhere in here. You're going to have exactly where it makes landfall will determine who gets the heaviest rains. But generally speaking, a widespread area is going to be impacted majorly. So there's really no way to take Sally lightly. Of course, there are other storms to watch. As we discussed, Paulette will move away. Teddy is probably the most immediate threat afterwards, although currently, Teddy is still a long ways out. So, after Sally, we can at least observe. But, Sally right now is the main concern. So that's one that we're going to be watching. a lot to watch in the Atlantic. Unfortunately, active pattern looks to continue, it seems. So once again, likely more storms to track after this one. We now are only one storm away from the Greek alphabet. We'll have Wilfred next, could be this wave actually, or this one. And then after that, the next storm will be named Alpha. We're going to be using the Greek alphabet. Seems almost inevitable at this point that we'll be using Greek names for the first time since 2005. Very impressive season this has been. Most storms have rapidly intensified up until landfall. Very concerning, but of course, with Sally, you want to take it seriously. Conditions are going to continue to worsen tomorrow. You're going to see tropical storm force conditions eventually begin to move onshore. Storm surge will continue to get worse, and rainfall will eventually be reaching the coastline in a dangerous capacity. So, once again, if you're in any of these areas, stay safe, be prepared, finish preparations now, evacuate if you've been told to. Always follow your local National Weather Service office and the National Hurricane Center for the latest information on these storms, and always follow the orders of local officials or government officials. They tell you to evacuate, always evacuate. Please stay safe and have a good night.